Support for the show comes from Carolina Forward, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to building a more equitable, democratic, and prosperous North Carolina.
You can learn more about their vision and values at carolinaforward.org.
North Carolina State Highway Patrol.
What cigarette do you smoke, Doctor?
A contributing factor to our juvenile delinquency of today.
Rock and roll has got to go.
And welcome back to the Hometown Holler. I'm Daniel Ayers.
And I'm Quinn Ray. Well, hey, man.
Need for mead. I got it.
You did.
This is my, I'm just going to break right into this. So every summer, specifically July 1st through 3rd, is the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg.
Okay.
Largest battle ever fought in the Western Hemisphere. And my brother and I always give each other little Gettysburg gifts. It's like our Christmas in July. A couple summers ago, he made me this this tank top. It says, I got the need for mead. General George Meade.
I was wondering where the tank top was coming
George
in
Meade
today.
was the Union commander at Gettysburg.
Okay.
And so living my best life.
You are, and you have more hair than I do, and I'm a little jealous about it.
I have no comment. You got a cool shirt, by the way, too.
Oh, thank you, yeah.
Folks who are listening are missing out because Quinn and I are really just rocking the fashion today. He's got a tie-dye. It's like the Joker.
It's the Joker.
Yeah, it's like if you're looking at the Joker on some kind of mind-altering substance.
Yes, the 1989 Joker style.
Who did that?
So Everything Dies, but Tim and Michelle Webster. They actually designed our logo.
Everything Dies. I love that.
Yeah, you can check them out on
Very
Instagram.
philosophical name.
Yes, Everything Dies.
Well, maybe we were just talking theology before this episode with our guests, so maybe we'll have to get back into those bigger questions on the back porch. But right now, let's dive into a more timely topic. But before we do that, let me introduce our guest. So today, Quinn, we're chatting with Theo Nollard, everybody's favorite politician in North Carolina.
That's right.
Everybody's favorite man. So for those of you who don't know Theo, he's a newly elected member of the Chapel Hill Town Council. He's had a really inspiring and interesting journey to the Town Council. Looking forward to hearing more about it directly from you, Theo. As a young person, renter, grad student, Theo brings a fresh perspective to local governance. Theo is the director of campus mobilization within the North Carolina Democratic Party coordinated campaign. And then you're also about to embark on the adventure that is law school.
That's the plan.
That's you're a brave man. What kind of law?
My hope is consumer protection. I think that's really interesting. I mean, we're going to talk about housing today, and
Right.
That clearly plays a role. But it remains to be seen. I took a practice LSAT. I'm not. It went pretty well, but we're going to see how the rest of it goes.
Well, best of luck there. So from 2022 to 2023, Theo served as the president of the Graduate and Professional Student Government. His leadership there was marked by a data-driven advocacy campaign that successfully convinced university administrators and the Board of Trustees to increase the minimum stipend for graduate students. That's a big deal. Yeah,
We were pretty pleased with it.
Yeah, I would imagine so, yeah. This move raised stipends from $17,000 to $20,000 annually. That's a huge jump.
About 25%, right?
Yeah.
With additional tiered increases significantly improving the financial well-being of many students. Moreover, Theo's efforts with UNC's Basic Needs Task Force led to increased funding for campus food pantries, addressing the crucial issue of student hunger. Chapel Hill has truly become Theo's home, and he's grateful for the warm welcome he's received. His diverse experiences as a young renter, student leader, member of the Planning Commission, and a dedicated advocate equip him uniquely, I think, to shape the town's transit and land use policies, promote local commerce, and strengthen the bridge between UNC and the wider Chapel Hill community. So we are thrilled to have Counselor Theo Nollard with us today to share his insights, experiences, his vision for the future of Chapel Hill. But we're not just here to talk about Chapel Hill. We're really here to talk a lot about affordable housing, one of the most important issues in this election cycle, and an issue that I haven't heard a lot about, frankly. I don't think it gets its due. So I'm looking forward to diving into that. So folks, sit back, relax, and join us for an engaging conversation with one of North Carolina's most passionate local leaders. Welcome to the podcast, Theo.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, man.
Quinn, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so one thing that is really, I think the first time I guess, kind of met you. We were on a Zoom doing a training for municipality. You were running for Chapel Hill. And so instantly gravitated to the idea that, like, man, there's another young person in local government. And so that was really cool to, get to make that connection and see that we both were on the same side of things with that. So what actually inspired you to run for Chapel Hill Town Council?
I always tell people it was a coincidence that it happened. So I was leading this pay raise campaign at UNC. And when I did that, I did a listening tour. I went to 30 different departments just to hear from students directly about why they wanted a pay raise, what their challenges were, things like that. And what I heard everywhere I went was it costs too much to live here. And I was asking around, okay, so how do I, the pay raise, that's a local issue. The housing issue, that's, a local government issue, I think. How do I learn more about this? And people told me, well, you got to get on the planning commission. That's where you figure out how this stuff works. And so I hopped on there. I was on there for about maybe 6 months all told, I think. And when it was time for people to run for office, I didn't see 4 people running that I thought would do better than me. And so I figured I'd put my name in, and I did. And the voters ended up agreeing with me. And the rest is kind of history, as they say.
How many people sit on the board?
There are 9 of us, including the mayor.
Oh, wow. And the mayor doesn't vote?
The mayor does vote.
Your mayor does vote. Man,
Oh, yeah.
That's a big board. I only sit with 5 colleagues and 1 mayor, so 6. But our mayor does not vote. We have a weak mayor system in that sense. But and it's also really unique that you're in a college town as well, and you started with talking with the students. So what is the population ratio with students and year round?
Yeah. So Chapel Hill has a population of 62,000 people, and there are 31,000 students enrolled at UNC, but I think about 10 to 12 of the people in Chapel Hill, 10 to 12,000 are students. So in the summer, the traffic goes way down, and the residents love that. We hear about traffic all the time. I admit that I love it too, but I also love when the students are around because then the place is young and vibrant and bustling with people. So it does create a significant challenge for small local businesses because you do have this flux of 4 months out of the year, counting the December holiday, a significant chunk of your population is gone. So it's an interesting dynamic for college towns like Chapel Hill.
And what experiences has shaped your perspective on local government to get involved with it? So we kind of heard what you were talking about, where not affordable housing was ready. People were saying you need to start doing this. But did you have any perspective of what local government was and kind of shaped your idea of it?
That's a great question. I started learning about local government about a year ago. I mean,
okay.
I always voted growing up, but one thing I always tell people now when they ask me about, I want to get politically involved, or they say, I feel powerless or whatever, I always tell people you have the most power at the lowest level of government. There are the fewest people in the room. Your vote carries the most weight because you're voting against the smallest population of people. You can actually, even in a big city, you can go to events and meet these people and actually talk to them and figure out what they want to do and things like that. And so for me, it was really a very, you ever get the career advice, do a bunch of informational interviews. Once I got into the student government, I was just meeting people left and right, trying to figure out, how does this system that I'm in work? How does the money work? One thing that I think people underestimate is your budgets and your money decisions. That's a huge deal. So when you think about what a local government does, they make laws and ordinances, but they also decide what they're going to spend on or not spend on. Are they going to spend? You look at Cary, they've got an amazing park that just came in Cary, $65 million bond, I think is what it took to do that thing. Huge bond, right? Chapel Hill, we've been spending on affordable housing for a while, and we just passed a bond with $15 million for affordable housing in it, which is kind of a drop in the bucket, to be honest. I want to give you guys some numbers at some point to talk about the scale of this problem. But what you spend on is a reflection of your values. And so I think that for a lot of people, if you're confused about what government means or what it does and you don't know where to start, first thing to do is just start asking people questions, because especially at the local level, if you email me and you say, Theo, I'm Daniel, and I don't really understand how rent works in this area. Can we talk about it? I'm gonna say yes. I'm gonna come sit down with you. You know what I mean? You email, the White House and say, I've got some thoughts about housing. Someone's gonna write you back probably at some point, but you're not gonna sit down with Joe Biden. You know what I mean? So I always tell people to get started at the local level, because you also need to find winnable fights in order to build your motivation and grow your coalition. If you pick a fight that you can't win, something that's too big, you're going to lose people because they get demotivated. So that sense of scale and targeting for your advocacy can really help you to build power over time.
That's just a reoccurring theme that I keep hearing, especially from this. Theo's experiences. Just show up. Like you said, you were about a year into it, and you just literally have to show up and ask a question, and it can just propel you into the next level.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm curious, just piggybacking off of that, you said about a year ago was when you really got into local politics. And then when did you get sworn in?
In November. Okay, so maybe it was a year and a half ago then, because I got involved in, let's see, February or March, I would say, of 23, and then I got elected in November of 23.
So within a year, right, like 9 months, you went from like, this is pretty cool, I want to get involved, to I do Theo Nollert solemnly swear that I'm up to no good,
It happened pretty fast. And I'll say, you some of that is knowing your moment and being lucky, and some of the luck is getting a good team. I had remarkable support from young people who were my staff.
Did you have people telling you should run? Were you drafted?
I did have people encourage me to run. We have a great delegation from Orange County. Greg Meyer, Alan Buensi are both mentors of mine, and they were both encouraging about the decision. There are folks in the Orange County Democratic Party and so on and so forth. And, we see examples of young people in this state right now doing great things. Chris Suggs in Kinston, Anderson Clayton, obviously. There's a lot of young elected officials. Quinn, you're getting a little old at this point.
I'm not a young dim anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Well, to kind of pivot, I guess, a little bit to affordable housing, can you give us kind of a bird's eye view of the affordable housing crisis in North Carolina? Most folks are well aware that we have an affordable housing crisis, but what does that look like? I think there might be a lot of misconceptions, like, oh, well, everybody is just buying houses and turning them into Airbnbs.
Yeah, it's just something I keep hearing people on the
I hear that all
campaign
the
trail
time.
is just, affordable housing. Well, what the hell? What is it?
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this.
Great.
Let's go.
Okay.
So the first thing that listeners need to know, there's this key term that's going to come up a lot, AMI, area median income. And when we talk about affordable housing, it's a technical term. We mean something that people who make less than the area median income can afford. So if you were to take... just a quick reminder for people who also have not done math in a while like me.
Yeah.
If you take a list of all the incomes in a region, right, the median income is going to be that one in the middle of the list. So it's more representative than if you take an average where your big ones
going to be
at the
heavily
top
weighted.
will
Based, yeah.
Exactly. Some numbers about the national scope, right? We have 42 million households in the country that are cost burdened when it comes to housing. That means they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. 22 million of those are renters, 20 million are homeowners. In North Carolina, we've got, I think, 600,000 renting households that are cost burdened, which is half of the total number of renters in the state. And we've got about 230,000 that are severely cost burdened, which means they spend 50% or more of their income just on housing.
Wow.
Now, one point that goes super underappreciated is that transportation is really expensive in America, too. AAA just released a report that for the average car owner, they're going to be spending $12,000 a year between maintenance, gas, fees and taxes, insurance, and financing. People always forget about financing. But paying for money is going to be a theme in this conversation that we have today. It's expensive to pay for money right now. Well, that means taking out a loan and paying interest, right? $12,000 a year is not cheap when you're thinking about a car. And when you think about the median income and things like that, I'll give you some numbers about Chapel Hill now. Where do I want to start with this? So the rent that you would need to pay for a one-bedroom in Chapel Hill, the average rent is going to be $1,400 a month.
Wow.
So that's $17,000 in a year. Now you take a grad student; they're making $20,000 a year. Grad students aren't people's favorite example. They always say, "Well, you're going to make more money later. You're in school. Fine.
Right.
Let's take a housekeeper. You're making $33,000, paying on about half of your income to rent if you're a housekeeper, or if you're a teacher, you're making $42,000. You're paying about 40% of your income. Now the federal government says nobody should pay more than 30% of their income to housing. And already we see a huge problem in Chapel Hill and in a lot of municipalities around the state that people who are working necessary, important jobs, really, teachers, what's more valuable than a teacher, right? And I'm sure you've talked to a lot of your
police
guests.
and firefighters. They
That's
all
right.
fall in there.
Municipal employees, tons of people who are doing the jobs that make our lives possible don't make enough to live anywhere near where they work. 74% of the people who hold jobs in Orange County commute from out of county to get to those jobs. Now, that's bad for the climate. It's bad for the towns because it means those people aren't sticking around to spend any money there. And it's bad for those people because they got to spend all this time in the car, right?
That's right.
They're away from their families. They're tired, things like that. And it's expensive to own a car. I think that these things are closely connected, that the cost of transportation and the types of cities that we've designed, and then the problem we have with providing affordable housing. If you wanted to be able to afford an apartment working minimum wage in Chapel Hill, you would work 120 hours a week. to afford it.
Wow.
It's just not sustainable.
Right. And I mean, having towns that were designed by the system to be car-centric towns right
Exactly.
now really, really puts a burden on folks.
And we haven't even talked about the parking situation in Chapel Hill.
We have lots of parking. People don't know where it is, but
Yeah.
about 33% of the town's surface area is parking.
Really?
Which is insane. And everybody always thinks we got no parking.
So
but
so I was one of those people until this is, I was today years old when I learned that 33% of Chapel Hill is apparently parking, because I'm one of those people, and I know Chapel Hill pretty well, but I'm always driving around like, where do I park?
I know.
It's one of those things. I think every town, another college town, quite smaller than Chapel Hill, but still the same argument is like, there's no parking. And it's like, well, no, there's only 3 parking spots in front of the restaurant you
That's
want to
right.
get into,
That's
but there's parking for you to walk.
And I think so. I always try to be sensitive to. You need a lot of information to fully understand any situation. So whenever a voter or just a person comes up to me and they have a problem, and I'm like, well, there's more to this problem than you realize. I try to be sympathetic to, like, it feels so real and immediate to folks,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
Like
their
it's
perception's real.
counterintuitive. Exactly, their perception's real. And I think that for the parking issue, one of the things this says to me about how we design our towns is that we have a huge opportunity and an obligation, I think, to think about much more fun and friendly towns to live in. I mean, to me, that means that you can walk, you can bike, you can hop on and off of a bus. I would love rail line, but let's not talk about that for 20 years in the Triangle, I would say. But, you even think about your street design and the third places that you might have. I mean, Carborough has Weaver Street Market, right? If you've ever been there, great plaza out front. We have got to figure out how to bring something like that to downtown Chapel Hill. It would just make it easier for people to say, I want to hang out there. And then from there, I'm going to go bookstore or coffee shop or go get a drink or run an errand, whatever you're going to do, right?
But
But
the European cities have been doing it for years. I mean, that's where it's at. People want to be outside. People want to be in that plaza, and that will help with affordable housing when you can walk to
Exactly.
get all your shit.
And, the thing about affordable housing that really sticks with me, that's the hardest to explain, that I want to take a stab at today, is how we end up in this situation that we can't get the housing we need. And I think there's a couple components. A lot of this has to do with the money, how you pay for it, right? If you're going to build a building, it costs money. And there's 3 scenarios in which you can build a building, right? You could build it and lose money. You could build it at cost, which is very hard to do precisely, or you could build it and make money. And the costs that go into a building there are several of them, right? The cost of land, cost of labor, which ranges from architects and engineers to the actual construction guys, et cetera. Management of the property later. You've got your financing, so the loan that you're going to take out, and you're going to get a loan from 2 sources if you're a builder, right? So you put some money in yourself if you're a developer, and then you've got a bank loan that comes last, and between those is your equity. You've got investors who are paying for you. And something people never know that's really interesting to me is that if I'm an investor thinking about putting money into building housing, right, in a for-profit system, then I'm accepting some risk that something might go wrong in this process. Maybe you don't get the approval that you want. Maybe the site turns out not to work as well. Maybe the market conditions change and the demand is not where it was. And if I'm going to lose my money, and I could put it in a high interest savings account and make 5% a year. I could put it in the S&P 500 and make 7, 8% a year, right? If I'm going to take on that risk, I want a higher return. And so what we end up with is a situation where if I'm a developer or a builder, I'm looking to make no less than probably 18% return ultimately on what I'm creating.
That's fair.
Or it's bad, right? And if I'm a nonprofit, I'm probably looking at no less than 10% because you've got your operating margins, you got to pay your staff, things like that. There are a lot of people in America who cannot afford the units that it is possible to build under those conditions because, let's say steel costs $800 a ton, right? I'm not going to get steel for a building at any lower than that. Wood has a price, right? Like you don't have to build with steel, you can build with wood. But there's a floor for all of those costs, for labor, for materials, for land. And you simply are not going to find someone who will build at cost or for profit if they cannot either break even or make money. And if they can't get that floor to a level where they're able to do those things, they're not going to build it. So what that means is we have a vacuum where there are a lot of low-income folks who need a place to live. And we need them to have places to live for our society to function. I mean, setting aside the fact that it's just morally good for them to have a
Right.
place to live. It's also pragmatically good. We need workers to be able to live places. And they can't find them under the market conditions. And there's a vacuum in leadership there. I mean, the only solution that I can see is that government's got to step in and play a role. And I don't think that we, speaking broadly, right? Like, I'm not sure that either party has been bold enough yet and ambitious enough in figuring out how to tackle this. Now, my personal belief is that the Democrats are going to get there first, and one reason I believe that is because, by God, I'm going to push them to get there. But
Sure.
there's a lot that we could do, and there's a great book by a guy, I think Shane Phillips is his name, The Affordable City. He's got this really easy thing to remember: supply, stability, subsidy. Those are the three pieces to solving an affordable housing crisis, right? Supply can help your middle income and your upper income folks. The way I like to talk about it is we have to legalize historical forms of middle class housing. Your multifamily housing, you're talking about quadplexes, cottage courts, reduce your setbacks. You get these beautiful, more communal places to live where it's really possible to have a walking, biking infrastructure, right? And you get a filtration effect. If we don't build enough housing for people in the upper or straight up upper class or upper middle income ranges, then they're taking units, and then that pushes people in the middle class down into the lower class units, and that pushes other people out into homelessness. Now, this is not a Reagan trickle-down economic situation. This is a simple supply and demand. But it's not true that market supply alone can solve the affordable housing component, because there's that floor, right? Below which people are not going to build buildings. And you got to be able to operate at a loss to do that. And the only entity I know of that can do that at scale is the government, that we subsidize things that we just think we need, like schools.
Well, I think it's also there to qualify that operating at a loss in kind of a one-dimensional sense, but operating at a huge gain in a much broader societal sense. So, I think to say that investing in subsidizing affordable housing is doesn't make, is voodoo economics, as the first George Bush would have said. Like, again, I think that's just taking a very narrow-minded approach to the concept of what is valuable.
That's absolutely right. And it's not just narrow-minded from a sort of abstract perspective. It's narrow-minded from an economic perspective, because if your workers are driving 30, 45 minutes, an hour to get to where they're going, they're not going to be as good at their jobs, and eventually they're going to stop coming. And we do see that municipalities, when they start to realize, UNC Health is in this situation right now, right? Where if somebody wants to come to UNC Health, the home that they want is affordable to them an hour away. So they drive to a park and ride lot, and then they hop on a bus, and then they come into the hospital to work. And I'm telling you, pretty much everybody listening to this podcast, unless they drop dead quickly, is going to need a hospital at some point in their life. And they're going to need workers to be at that hospital. And if we don't figure out a way to house people close to where they work, we end up with these problems where we don't have people willing to take these jobs.
Yeah, I think this is a systematic issue that has been here for years. We can get into the class and racism here, but it goes back to 1914, 1948, when they took away from the covenant that if you buy this house, you can only sell it to white people. Right. And so that has now just in COVID exacerbated the situation to let us know that this is happening. And it falls back. And I think America is one of the few that allows their municipalities to write these local LDOs. And so when they took these rules away that you can't put in race and class, local people that were running for government made these LDOs to allow land development ordinances to allow these suburban houses to be made, to allow certain people to have minimum lot sizes. And now we have hit a climax of needing to fix this. So on one hand, I'm a little frustrated that it is local, like municipalities, but I also like it because then it allows people like you and I to get on a board to make these changes. And I don't understand why people are so afraid of, like, the big hip thing and I think would be it's not just that it's hip. I think it's a great solution. It's the mixed use development,
right?
To urbanize us in a way where everything is centralized, where we can put multi-use zoning where single housing used to be, or single family zoning used to be. And a lot of people, I got a lot of push. We just rewrote our LDO in Elon, and we got a lot of pushback for doing stuff like, we bought our house to have our house, not to have duplexes beside us. And I get that, I'm empathetic with it, but what the hell are we going to do? Like, we can't not house people.
Yeah, that's why I really like to think of it as sort of legalizing historical forms of middle class housing. I think it's less scary to people in some way. I mean, we do make it illegal to build things through the zoning code other than suburban single family housing, which leads to sprawl, which is inefficient from a tax perspective, and it makes it hard to have a corner store in your neighborhood or a little coffee shop you can walk to or things like that. And people are resistant to change. That's just part of human psychology, and I understand that. I do think that there's a lot of potential, though, to talk about a lifestyle that's more fun for people and more communal for people, and to shift that way. And it's one reason that I think on the other hand, that we need to find allies at the state level to say, look, statewide, we have a problem we need to solve, and we need to think about what kind of regulations we put in place that are preventing us from solving this problem, and we may have to take steps to circumvent those on some level.
So I'm just a simple country lawyer, and I followed most of that, LDOs, covenants. Give me a good example, a tangible example of a project or a community could be in Chapel Hill, could be across North Carolina, that does it well, that you could point to and say, this is what I'm talking about when I talk about affordable housing solutions. Just to kind of get, I'm a visual learner.
Well, what is Chapel Hill planning on doing with that $15 million bond?
Yeah. So that bond money will go largely to partners who help us to do, the town of Chapel Hill is not a builder. So we'll fund groups like Habitat or Empowerment. I mean, Empowerment has this new thing, the Peach Apartments, that are coming in for people making 30% of the area median income.
Aren't there also like tiny homes somewhere in Chapel Hill?
So I'm working on trying to get micro units into our pipeline, not tiny homes. So this is, I'll take that example.
Micro units. That's a new term for me.
Yeah. So there's a great book, The Birth of a Building, by a guy named Ben Stevens, and Ben has he presented at the UNC Real Estate symposium one time about micro units, and that's how I sort of got onto the concept. Is that basically what we can control at the market rate right now is unit size as a proxy for cost, right? Like if I have a 2,000 square foot apartment, you're going to expect it to be more expensive than a 1,000 square foot apartment. And again, if we had massive levels of subsidy, I mean, Chapel Hill has created in the last, I think, 10 years, about 1,100 units of affordable housing in the town. And we still have huge need over and above that. And we've done that through subsidy and through negotiation with developers, that when people come to build a project and they need an approval in order to build that project, they will sometimes suggest to us, well, we know that we need to rezone this land for a certain purpose, and we think you're going to really like our building. We think you're going to like it in part because we're going to give you, 10% of our units are going to be affordable to people at 80% AMI, right? It's not a solution at scale, but it is one of the only tools in the toolkit now.
Who vets that to ensure that the people living in those in that housing do in fact meet those requirements? Is that the FHA?
We have
I guess that wouldn't be, because that's federal.
Right. We have a housing office in the town government. Our director of housing, Sarah Vinas, is actually really outstanding, extremely smart and really good at this sort of stuff. One of the reasons that so Chapel Hill has a housing plan that calls for significantly more than $15 million in investment, partly so that we can increase the staffing in that office. And bond money does not go to staff members because it's one-time funding, right? So this speaks to me to part of the scale of the problem, and the reason that it needs to have a state and a national level coalition pushing to make this a huge issue is because the money. I mean, in North Carolina, one thing I would say is we're cutting corporate taxes at a time when we could really use those for our schools. We could use those for housing. There's all sorts of buckets of money that we need to be able to spend on. But we have been able to get 1,100 units through this mix of negotiation and subsidy. And some of that subsidy goes to construction cost, and a lot of our partners leverage it so that they actually end up using that sort of seed money to become eligible for much more money from other places and combine it. And sometimes what we do is we purchase existing affordable housing. There's something that people call NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing. So you take a building that's 5 years old, right? It's going to be more expensive typically than a building that's 60 years old, especially if that 60-year-old building is facing some maintenance issues or something like that. Well, then the town might step in and help a partner to purchase that building and then write a covenant that's going to keep the purchasing or rental range within an affordable sort of sphere.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. But both of those things are pretty expensive to do ultimately, and so it limits our ability to address the full problem just on what you can do off of municipal taxes, essentially.
So one thing you said a few minutes ago, I'm kind of tracking back a little bit earlier, but this really stuck out to me because when I think about affordable housing, I think about, well, we just, again, need to build more multifamily units, more apartments, more condos, a townhome here, a townhome there, everywhere a townhome, right? But you're talking about it in terms of, no, we need to, this is a holistic thing, and we need to, there's a place for every type of resident in an ecosystem, in a housing ecosystem. It's not just subsidized housing. It's not just multifamily units. It is single family homes. And,
that's absolutely right.
Yeah, that's something that I don't know. It's not something that really occurred to me until you mentioned it. So I just wanted to kind of pin that as something I found really interesting.
Yeah, one way I would think about it is if you imagine a pie, right? I love to imagine pie.
Absolutely.
And right now,
Rhubarb.
a huge, I do love rhubarb.
Daddy's little baby loves rhubarb.
A huge section of this pie that we've got is going to single-family housing, right? And we need a slice of this pie to be single-family housing, but we have artificially restricted the other kinds, right? Not only subsidized housing, but do we have townhomes? Do we have quadplexes? Do we have little cottage courts? There's all these neat and creative ways to house people that are really pleasant and more affordable at more price points. And we've just made it really hard to do those things. So we have to fix that, and we have to subsidize housing for people who are falling below that level where they can afford what the market is able to create.
Well, and making it hard, it's not just policies that make it hard and ordinances that make it hard. It's the narrative around it. When you talk about, we'll just take Alamance, for example. We had some new, lower income apartments built or income-based apartments, and residents threw a fit because that means there's going to be more crime. The type of people that go into income-based housing are a certain type of way. So I think it's also up to us and collectively to not only change policies, but to change the narrative about it. That affordable housing isn't just for these type of people.
That's right.
And it's it's racist based mainly on it.
Yeah, and people underestimate the extent to which housing is the foundation of prosperity. I mean, housing is the foundation of our society, right? Like your society will not function if you are failing to provide housing, and if it's not affordable, people can't be healthy. They can't be effective in school. Because if their money is constrained, everything is constrained. And you think about early childhood opportunity, right? If you're having to work too many jobs to pay for your house, you can't spend time with your kid. That sets your kid back in school. If you can't afford books, I mean, there's great studies from like Chicago economists, right? A family that has a ton of books in the house, you can predict that kid's educational attainment level after the third grade based on their reading level, pretty much. And making housing accessible and affordable to people is part of how we create a thriving society in general. And changing the trajectory that people are on starts with equipping them to have good housing. And I think that segregating the housing, you think about the downfall of public housing, well, some of that was deliberately contrived, and some of it is that we were segregating our communities in another way.
That's right.
And so public housing has got to be part of an integrated community, and I mean that in every sense of the word.
Yeah, are you familiar with FDR's Second Bill of Rights?
Moderately.
Yeah, so I mean, are you familiar with this?
I'll go with Theo.
Yeah, well,
moderately.
in his final term, of course, he died early on, not long after getting sworn in for like
the third time.
Yeah. Or was it his fourth term?
No, it was his third term.
It was his third term because he got 32, 40. Yeah, it was his third term. Thank you. Yeah. It was kind of an updated version of the Bill of Rights, not to replace the original, but to add to it. And in that was the right of every family to a decent home. And when I think about, you mentioned prosperity and housing being a keystone of prosperity. When Americans think about kind of the golden
such
age
a good point.
of American prosperity, it was a time when housing was accessible, when people could get a job and not spend 50, 60, 70, 80% of their income just to keep a roof on their head. And look what happened in the broader economy as a result of the accessibility to housing.
I got to hit you with another statistic. And Quinn, to your point about the narrative, one thing I'm still learning as an official is how powerful stories are versus numbers. I mean, I'm a numbers guy. That I try to be data driven in my decisions. But when I'm talking to other people, I'm always trying to think about how do I tell the story of that grad student friend of mine who said, I'm going to choose between going to the dentist or fixing my car because of my rent this year. That's a story that's real. But so one metric people use to think about home ownership. I've talked a lot about renting today, and we also have cross-burdened homeowners. So we talk about the ratio of the median home price in an area to the median wage in an area. And right now that ratio is the worst it's been in 50 years.
Wow.
It is 6x. So you gotta if you want to afford a home, it's going to be 6 times the cost of that home is going to be 6 times the cost of the median salary. In Chapel Hill, it's 7 times. So we're doing a little worse in Chapel Hill. But what this leads me to think about is that home ownership has become an investment vehicle in America. We think of it as a way to build wealth. And that's a really tricky
Just gonna say
thing
that
to
you beat me
address.
to this.
Yeah, it's because we have this sort of perverse incentive, right? That to solve the housing crisis, we've got to control the price of housing. And we get hit with this both from the building perspective and then from the homeowner's perspective. So from the builder's perspective, I'll give you Chapel Hill as an example. Rents are down in Chapel Hill 4% in the last year. Now they're way up from pre-pandemic, but they're down 4%. And the reason for that is that we permitted a bunch of building. I mean, we got a couple thousand units that are in pipeline to come online. No one is coming to the town council asking to build things right now. Almost nobody. We have a very slow season, partly because interest rates are high, but also because as rents moderate, that profit window I was talking about earlier has narrowed so much that people just don't want to build anything. And so that's a perfect example of that sort of catch-22. And for homeowners, the perverse incentive that we end up in is that if you are predicating your retirement on your home value going up, and the value of homes has outstripped the increase in wages in this country historically. And so that means that people put their eggs into this basket, and then they're terrified of that basket losing value because all of a sudden, how am I supposed to ever quit working if my home is not worth this much? But that also means that there's an incentive to keep housing scarce, because that scarcity is what drives that increase in value. And so we've got a really complicated problem we have to figure out how to untangle of making it possible to have housing be thought of as something that is a public good and a right in this country, and figure out how we're going to solve the economic challenge of the fact that we built a system in which housing is a retirement and investment vehicle, and that's going to matter deeply to people in a very rational way. And I don't know yet what the solution is to that, but I do know that we have to solve it if we're going to address this problem.
Well, I think I speak for Quinn and myself when I say we are grateful that there are people like you
For sure.
Out there solving it, people in positions of actual authority who take this problem seriously, who read about it, who study it like it's your job, because
it is my job.
Because it's your job.
Yep.
We were coming up on time, but I do want to get in a few rapid fire questions.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's do it.
My first one would be, you're clearly a busy dude, but do you have hobbies? And if so, what are those hobbies?
Yeah, I do have hobbies. I love to take long walks. We're going to write a little Hinge profile here for folks.
That's great. Yep.
No, I'm a big fan. So I write some poetry. I mean, we didn't talk about my grad career here, but I spent my 20s studying Renaissance poetry in graduate school.
Wow.
And
Favorite poet?
Ooh, from the Renaissance? Or
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I would go with Ben Jonson. I think he's a little slept on compared to our boy William Shakespeare. But Johnson's very funny. He once challenged a dude. So he was alive in the late 16th, early 17th century, and this was a time when we had armies that would fight each other on the field, right? Johnson loved the Iliad, and he went to war as a kid and said, "This works just like the Iliad, right?" It does not. You can ask any military. He challenged the guy to a duel in single combat on a normal battlefield, and the guy accepted. Johnson kills the guy, takes his armor, goes back, and everybody in his camp is kind of like, "What is this guy doing?" Like that should give you an example. Like, there's just the bizarre. He loved Latin. I mean,
only in the
Renaissance.
Renaissance.
Yeah, that's
great.
right. That's right.
So poetry, hiking. Is there a third?
I play a couple instruments. I love to cook. I was just messing with some pork belly earlier. I'm trying to solve a little tenderness issue with the pork belly.
This is a Hinge profile.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. Ladies, the line forms to the left. Or dudes. I'm not going to, it's Pride Month. Humans. All right, Quinn.
So I think it's clear. I mean, you're an English major, and you talked about 2 books that people should read. But what is one book, if they don't read the 2 you already suggested, what is one book people should read?
About housing or in general?
In general, just a book that you feel like needs to tickle people's.
This is like asking me my favorite movie, and I immediately forget that I've ever seen a film. Although actually,
there's
several competitors for that. Heat, Michael Mann, great movie. Dudes Rock, also big fan of I Heart Huckabees. I know you didn't ask this question, but those are some good movies.
Okay, well, what's the most recent book you read?
Well, I'm reading that Ben Stevens book, Birth of the Building. I really like that. I was reading an interesting book actually the other day. I can't remember. I think it's called The Rebels. It's about like AOC and Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. Purportedly, it's about them. I got about halfway through, and it was like maybe 10% about Elizabeth Warren in that time. But it was really interesting because it goes back and it pins the corporatization of. So the Republican Party was taking money from corporate donors a while ago, right? And it's about how the Democratic Party got the same kind of corporate donor base. And it argues that it's because when Jimmy Carter was president, and I love Jimmy Carter. I mean, that dude, I love him. He's great. But unfortunately, when he was president, he set out to increase taxes on the wealthy and reduce them on middle class and lower class folks. And the reverse happened because he couldn't manage Congress effectively. And when that happened and Democrats got swept out of office, to get back into office, they were trying to figure out how the hell are we supposed, Republicans are out raising us 17-1. How are you supposed to run a campaign and compete when you're being outspent 17-1? They copied the Republican playbook, which was to basically have a kind of pay-to-play national donor system, right? And so this book is sort of about how this progressive movement of the 21st century is trying to come out from under the shadow of that sort of corporate money thing. But it's tough. If you're not going to compete on a level playing field, then you're going to lose. So we got sort of a problem ahead of us to disentangle as a country.
and one last question. If we hopped into your car, you turned it on, what's going to come up?
The classical station is playing on the radio.
Oh, man.
I'm a classical station guy.
Do you have a favorite composer? I also love class. I mean, I love music in general, but also
it depends on the
classical.
mood, right? Mozart is great for light and flighty stuff. Big fan of some of his opera stuff, but Brahms, Beethoven.
I was like
I
Brahms,
was a
dude.
violin. My original plan for my career was to be a professional violinist. My goal was to be, traveling soloist. We had a slight gap between talent and ambition in that case.
Sure.
And this was my first sort of
But
professional crisis.
the ambition was there.
The ambition was there. Did I practice as much as I should have?
Yeah.
Maybe not. But
Geniuses, virtuosos, they don't have to practice.
well,
That's actually not true.
I'm not a genius. That's for sure.
That's actually not true. That's really cool, man. Yeah, Brahms great, Mozart great. I just saw Amadeus for the first time.
Great. That movie slaps.
Fantastic
That movie
movie.
slaps so hard.
Me, Amadeus.
You guys should, if you haven't seen it yet, you should watch Perfect Days, the new Wim Wenders movie. It's great.
I haven't seen it.
It's
Perfect
so
Days.
good.
Look it up.
I'll write it down.
Theo, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And folks, we're gonna wrap up this episode, but we're going to the back porch. So we hope that you can stick around, right, for a little.
oh yeah, we talked about a little scotch. I
just
believe,
wanted to make
so.
sure there is some scotch here for you. Come for the housing policy, stay for the scotch. So, folks, we hope you'll join us by subscribing to our Patreon, becoming a sustainer for the Holler, helping us keep this a sustainable project and making North Carolina just a better place to live and work and be, one conversation at a time. Theo, we have a special gift for you from our friends at TS Designs. You familiar with TS Designs?
I think we were talking about them before this, weren't we?
Nope, it's a different one.
Oh,
Yeah.
You have
So-
a lot of design friends.
We
Yes.
we have so many. Well, TS Designs are very dear friends. They have provided us with awesome shirts, Hometown Holler logo on the front. So not only is it like real sexy, gonna make you look real good, but it's also ethical. It's like the
Great.
world's most ethical
It'll really
t-shirt.
round out that Hinge profile. then.
Yes.
I have to shout out a friend of mine got me this shirt. I have that fell out of a coconut tree quote from Kamala Harris on a shirt. A good friend of mine gave me this.
Well, and then read I love the bottom. Can
you read it?
Yeah,
I can't. I'm wearing
so,
it.
So Theo's shirt is a monkey falling out of a coconut tree, and it says, "You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you."
It's a great shirt.
That's our vice president for you.
That is a conversation starter. So we got a T-shirt for you to round out your T-shirt collection, your summer collection. So stick around for that, folks. So head over to the back porch, subscribe on our Spotify, Apple Music, on YouTube. Leave us reviews. We are like. We got a lot of awesome reviews, so let's keep that going. Just hit that 5 stars. And
Any final thoughts, Theo? Where can people find you?
Yeah, I do have I'm going to leave a review.
Shame
where they
on
can
me.
find me.
Shame
yeah.
on me for not.
I'm
yeah.
on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I think I'm Theodore Nollert for both of those. Just went with my name. I have a Substack. English major on town council. I'm going to have a Substack. Got to start posting more. But I wanted to leave a review because I am not a podcast guy. I do not listen to podcasts. But a friend of mine put me on his family Spotify plan very generously, and I have listened to your podcast, and it's one of the only ones that I have
great.
done a
Thanks,
repeat
man.
listen. And I'm not saying that just because you had me on the show.
Thank you. Thank
Well,
you.
and we're talking about Patreons. I wanted to do one more shout out. We talk about how it will help us sustain and keep our lights on and have us keep the studio. Theo came in today and he was like, "You really are in a studio." So just so the listeners out there, we're not just in Daniel's grandma's basement. We actually
right.
have a studio.
She would let us in if I asked.
She would, but we
Yeah.
have bills to pay.
No, we do. We have a really nice space, and with your support, we can stay here.
All right, well, let's head over to the back porch.
All right. Thanks
Thanks,
fellas.
guys.